3, 2, 1, go. We will be having 2 points in our case on closing opposition today. Firstly, I'm going to be talking about the importance of stigma, the stigma of being an ex-con as a deterrent against committing crimes. And secondly, I will be talking about how this motion would make prisons worse. They would lead to more abuse. It would lead to people being in prison longer than they should be. It would lead to us unable to correct all the things that are wrong with prison systems all over the world. Before I get to either of those points, rebuttal to what we've just heard from the closing government. Because the entirety of the closing government's point rests on the logic that by passing this motion, you would be reducing biases against minorities in the criminal justice system. And we think this is frankly absurd. Why do we think this is absurd? Because this is a tantamount to saying that the best way to fight unfounded racial prejudice is to make it completely impossible for anyone to access the truth, right? They say people have the wrong idea of what reality is, so we will block them entirely from checking out what reality actually is, and that will somehow solve the problem. Let me dive in and deal with this in a more detailed way, okay? Because here are the mechanisms by which the closing government claims that racial biases arise under status quo. They say, firstly, you have the media can like show the one picture of a black person, can always show the picture of a black person who's been convicted, but never show pictures of white people. And so people get the idea that that's statistically representative. To this, we have the following responses. Firstly, the media can still do that, it's just the news media can't do that. So representations in fiction or representations of like dramatized for your convenience, this trial that we don't know who the person on trial was, to the extent the media has an incentive to do that now, they will still have that incentive, that representation will still be there. 2, existing biases under the status quo are not going to go away tomorrow. People will continue with the prejudices that they have already, and again, there'll be no data to correct them. 3, people have a fear of the other, which is one of the things that leads to racial biases in the first place. This is why people can be racially biased even against ethnicities that don't even exist in their country to any large degree. So they're not taking it from the local news media, they're taking it from xenophobia. That's why this exists, right? So the correct way to combat this is to be able to tell people, no, look at the actual statistics. Black people don't commit violent crimes at a higher rate once you control for economic factors. You're wrong, and then people can change their minds. Moving on. We say stigma as a deterrent, right? Because we ask from the point of information, don't you think that stigma is an important part of the deterrence against committing crimes? To go into that a little bit further, we say that if you've never been to prison before, then prison is an abstract, whereas your peer's opinion is something concrete. This sounds odd because to a rational mind, right, going to prison, even for a relatively short time, seems like it would be a lot worse than people knowing you've been to prison. But as OGs themselves point out, people are not rational actors most of the time, right? And abstract fears are much less good at motivating people than concrete fears. And reputation, a fear for our reputation, is wired into us at a very deep level as social animals and is often a critical motivating factor, even in contexts where for a rational actor, there'd already be sufficient reasons to sway their behavior. So as an example of this, right, consider exercise, right? It is rational to exercise every day in the hopes of giving yourself a healthier and longer life. Nevertheless, people are vastly more likely to do that if they have an exercise group or if all the people they know are exercising or eating healthy, right? We say if you look at religious communities, even people who believe in their religion are much more likely to stick to its tenets when they are surrounded by people who also believe in that religion and practice those tenets, even though, again, rationally, if you believe in the religion, you should stick to its tenets regardless of what the people around you are doing. Now, OG says deterrence doesn't work like that because 1, at the point of committing the crime, you're not thinking clearly, and 2, you cannot conceptualize the intensity of the punishment. But this is exactly the issue, right? It is precisely because you cannot conceptualize what prison is like that an important part of the deterrence against committing crimes has to be appealing to something that works at the irrational level, right? The fear for our reputation that is an automatic shying away from the things that will bring us shame and to bring our family shame that is important to keep people from committing crimes, right? Okay, so secondly, why do we believe that this will make prisons worse for everyone involved. Okay, there are three mechanisms by which this happens. The first is that people get kept in prison for longer than they would under the status quo, because prisons have to be extra careful about releasing people, because no one can know to be fearful of them, and the members of the public cannot know to shy away from them, and cannot know to not put them in positions where they might be tempted to reoffend, right? And we saw this dynamic playing out perfectly in Top House, right? When opening opposition pointed out that people that, like the citizens now, wouldn't be able to know when people committed crimes. And what we heard from the opening government on this was, okay, so if you think someone's going to reoffend, lock them up forever and throw away the key. And we say this is the dynamic that will play out whenever people cannot be certain somebody won't reoffend, because the prison officials have to be careful. Before I continue, I will take opening. Yeah.
Look, most people upon leaving prison go back to their old environment. The most important thing is that there is an expectation on them to do well, which they will want to conform to in order to live a good life, which they believe they now can. There was no response throughout of that.
We think the expectation to do, like the pressure to do well and not reoffend, exists on either side of the house, right? Nobody wants their family members to commit a crime again, especially after they've been to prison once. Moving on. Secondly, we say that this increases the possibility of abuse in prisons, because when in prison, your communications with the outside are closely monitored and controlled by the people who control the prison. And that's one of the reasons why abuse in prison happens so tragically often under status quo. But at least under status quo, there's the crucial mitigating factor that once released from prison, you can tell your story and tell people how awful it was. And we see this happening fairly frequently, that after getting out from prison, people will go on the news and talk about what a terrible time it has and how much more abused prisoners are than what the public would generally consider fair. And that crucial mitigating factor is removed under the motion. But thirdly, and this is important, if you do not know, if nobody knows who has been in prison and what happens to them afterwards, you cannot keep track of that. It is impossible for society to do any kind of science and figure out what the actual effects of prison on people's future life are, including future reoffenses, including how well rehabilitation works. So however badly prison works, it is impossible to correct that in the future under the motion. And for those reasons, we beg to.
Thank you very much to the member for the opposition. And now I want to invite the government whip to sum up this debate from government side. You're here.
Hello, can I just be heard?
Yes, but you're a little bit quiet. Can you say it again?
Headphones.
No, it's way better.
Now better? Okay, marvelous. Sorry, just setting up my timer. Want to be remembered. Oh wait, I'm on YouTube. Hello, my fans. So 3, 2, 1, go. Why have we won this debate, ladies and gentlemen? Quite clearly, because we uniquely have shown why you get less crime in the first place. A lot of people have spoken about rehabilitation down the road, and we think, yes, you do get better rehabilitation, as our opening said. But the key point, what we have shown uniquely, is you get less crime because crimes are solved. Crimes are solved because the police are no longer just targeting ethnic minorities. Police are no longer just looking through their list of who was arrested last year and picking up the usual petty criminals. They are going for the real suspects. So, firstly, just some quick rebuilding. When opposition, closing opposition said, fiction will still portray blacks as criminals and people are just scared of otherness. Sorry, do most American women, when a Asian Chinese man steps in their lift, clutch their purse tightly? No, they don't. They clutch their purse tightly when they see a black American and they've seen a black person every day. They're not scared of the unknown, it's the opposite. They're scared of the known quantity, of the New York Times front pages from the 80s, of the Central Park 5, of a Fox News sensationalized coverage of young black men being thugs and super predators. That is what is creating the problem. So the truth, he said we can rebuttal the truth. Unfortunately, we cannot. White and black people use drugs at the same rate, but it's hard to get pure data on that. What is far easier is that 5 times more black people are arrested for drug use than white people. Unfortunately, the statistics do suggest black people commit more crime because the statistics are who the police arrest. And the police put far more effort into arresting black people than arresting white people because that's where their prejudices put them. Now, people are, so we'd also like to point out quickly one extension of, not extension, just as Tom said, on, yes, this leads to police just being biased against all Black people in general, but also, and religious minorities and so forth, but specifically, this leads to police being biased against individuals. In most Western countries, we have contempt of court rules where you're not supposed to bring someone's past into it. If someone's on trial for murder, why should the fact they've been a petty criminal, shoplifting in the past, be relevant? But it is. The judge will probably know it from his colleagues. The police officers will know it from their colleagues. In the era of the internet, it is impossible to keep this information secret. Thomas explained already, the police just go pick up the usual suspects. And this means that the police, this means that anyone with access to the internet will know on a jury what this past person has done. And we see this because every year in the UK, at least, one person is convicted, one or two people are convicted as a juror for contempt of court for using Facebook and Google to find out about the person. These are just the ones who are caught because the person on the other end reveals they were messaging them. How many people get away with it? How many young Black men go to jail for things they didn't do just because they shoplifted in their past, or even they did nothing, or they just had smoke of marijuana and the police officers picked on them? Now, people are afraid of jail. But the people will not forget this. This is rebutting closing opposition. And when he goes, people are ashamed of letting their families down, we think this is completely disproportionate and harms families who haven't done anything wrong. We don't think families should be shamed by their members being arrested. It should be an individual case, individual punishment, not punishing everyone. And this doesn't affect people evenly. Does he want the judge to take this into account? Does he want to go, oh, you come from a very close-knit family, whereas you're an orphan. Orphan, I'm giving you 10 years. Person from a close-knit family, I'm giving you 5, because you'll get a lot of family shame when you step out of jail for 5 years afterwards. We think this is a ludicrous idea for the justice system. And when they talk about worsening prisons, we just like to rebut this. We can see the effect of prison rehabilitation just from crime statistics. Do the number of crimes go down or up in society? We can track these. Secondly, people can still talk as a private individual about how awful prison is. People don't remember you went to prison, but you can just go, the prison system is awful and it should be reformed. Prison reformers aren't all former criminals themselves. Not all police reformers are former policemen or former criminals. People can still talk as individuals. And as Tom said, now our prisons are no longer just filled with young Black men. People will actually give a shit about going to jail, and they'll actually care about making sure they're semi-decent conditions, and will also get the justice system sorted out so that it's better and fewer miscarriages of justice happen, because the police are no longer stereotyping and arresting so many ethnic minorities. Now, before I rebut you.
Your case is the logic, which is wrong. A racist policeman in Minnesota won't erase its biases. It will bias presume that all are guilty. Besides, OJ fiated that you have statistics on who's in prison, so you'll probably know the percentage of Black people. The case is absurd.
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, we're not sure we'll still be publishing ethnic statistics of criminals. Secondly, the police officer will be a slow cohort effect. Oh, hang on, no. We don't know if he's implementing post hoc. If it's post hoc, then it's instant. If this is only for ongoing crimes, then it will have a slow cohort effect, and in 5 years, we will definitely see the results. Because as we said, it's not for crime statistics. It's that every single newspaper headline front page of a criminal is a young Black man. It is not the issue of statistics. It is the issue of disproportion. Media coverage covers it. For example, media coverage is what affects it. Most people would not know white and Black people deal drugs at the same rate. They would think it's all young Black men in cities. Now, some rehabilitation, something. Currently, rehabilitation simply does not work well in the current status quo. Wait, hang on. I said I would take CO quickly. CO?
Let's say that by some miracle you're wrong, or by some miracle some other kind of inequality in enforcement shows up. How would you even know it's happening, given that you don't have access to who is being thrown into prison?
We do have access who's being thrown into prison. I'm not sure if there's a comprehension issue here, but it goes, we erase a memory after they're released from prison. So at the time of the arrest, we still know of the entire current prison population what their demographics are. We presume people go to prison for a couple of years, so we have data for at least a couple of years. That should be fine to get a large enough sample size. Now, just some of it, some rebuttal. Rehabilitation doesn't work under status quo. Criminals are in and out of jail. It's a revolving door. I shouldn't have to explain this. Now, when they said about pedophiles and whatever, you can go to the police the moment you leave jail, or in jail you can be told, go to the police afterwards and say, or the health authorities and say, I have an issue, I have a problem. You go to them and you won't be judged as a criminal. You'll be judged as a hero. They'll go, wow, this person says I have urges I can't control. Please give me therapy to help control them. We think that's much better. The point about domestic abuse, we think most wives would divorce their husbands while they're in jail if they know that it's going to be wiped when they come out. We think that can be dealt with. And then, yeah, we pointed out, and a lot of the rest has been rebutted by Tom. So yeah, we would just say under our system, you get crimes actually solved, the actual criminal suspects taken to jail, rather than a lazy stereotype of young ethnic minority men. And through slow effect, fiction changes, and they're no longer stereotyped, and we get a far less racist society. I can see I've run out of time. Thank you, propose. Sorry.
I'd like to thank the government whip. I think everyone in this debate has spoken over time, and I welcome the opposition whip. He will be the first one, maybe not to.
This is so unfair. No, just kidding. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So 3, 2, 1, go. 3 parts to this speech. Firstly, why CG are out of this debate. Secondly, where are more crimes committed? Thirdly, where is there a better situation for ex-cons and prisoners in society? Let's begin. All of the rebuttal will be integrated within the questions. First on CG, look, it's quite clear at this point that the vast majority of their case is about why there is a problem with racial inequality in the justice system, specifically in the United States and around the world. And we obviously agree. And when they are attacked on explaining how exactly this is going to change by the mere fact of this motion, they have very little analysis. Let's go to what they do have. First, they say, look, the New York Times won't be able to present the photo of the black convict, and then people will be less scared. We already point out that fiction can be just as scary for individuals. But then they say, oh, look, fiction isn't enough because I'm not scared of what I don't know, like the Chinese person. I'm afraid of things that I do know and are close to me. First, fiction is very much something that could be as scary to individuals as known to him, simply because the actors look in the same skin color that the actual people I'm going to see on the streets are. And when I think of these people as being very violent, that's something that's threatening. But secondly, forget fiction. Like statistics is something that exists and is going to be just as scary as they acknowledge, right? Black people still commit more crimes, specifically when their opening government acknowledges the fact that most crimes are crimes of economics. So on the mere fact that black people are poor, that is likely to be true. Fox News and the New York Times are likely to jump on the opportunity to remind people of that, even if they don't have a picture of a specific prisoner. They're going to tell them the vast majority of people who commit crimes are black, so exactly the same thing happens. They say, oh, this doesn't happen because you don't publish the racial demographics. If this were true, how on earth would you even figure out there is a problem with racial inequality in the justice system to begin with? You don't have these stats in the first place, so it completely doesn't make sense. But then they say an even funnier thing in WIP. They say, look, the statistics that are bad are only a result of the bias. That's the only reason why black people commit more crimes, and therefore we solve the problem. This is completely cyclical because the reason you claim you solve the issue of stats is that you bring less people who are black into jail, but that rests on the idea that the justice system is going to be reformed because you no longer have those stats that are causing people to hate black individuals. So their case is completely cyclical. I think it's clear that they're out of this debate and have no real impact right now. Let's talk about where we prevent more crimes. Where we prevent more crimes. Okay. Opening opposition gives you a wonderful case about how you can prevent reoffenses in a much more clear way, right? Because ex-cons will have an easier time committing crimes when people don't know that. They're attacked on this, we think, very fairly by opening government that says to them, look, you can't know, if a person is very clearly like a rapist and a murderer and the people who claim as the largest impact in their side, we'll probably keep them in jail for life, or at least until we're very, very certain that they won't commit crimes. Joseph gives you a much better analysis on why we actually get more crimes and a much more important part of the justice system as a whole, and that is deterrence, right? We say very simply that deterrence today stems to a huge extent from me thinking that I'm going to be stigmatized and have a hard life when I come out. And the exact analysis that Joe gives you here is exactly why the response we get preemptively from OG doesn't stand, because they say, look, people are irrational, and therefore the weighing is mostly about the likelihood of me being caught and not the exact severity of the punishment. First of all, if people are that irrational, it's unclear to me why I'm able to, at the point where I commit the crime, I evaluate the likelihood of me being caught in this specific crime, and this is what factors more into my decision-making process. But Joe explains to you why exactly because you're irrational, the fear that is this fear of the stigma and not in prison is the main source in your decision-making process. Because one, you cannot imagine prison how it's like, especially before you've committed your first crime, right? So the vast majority of instances, I can imagine how people are going to hate me the day after, how it's going to feel to be hated upon and people to look at me in a negative way by others in society. I know how this feels because I was in many cases on the other side of the spectrum, because I probably know or have heard of other people who are criminals, so I can feel this in many other issues. But secondly, the irrationality is exactly what makes the fact that I know this so important, right? Because because people hating me and feeling that my community is something that objects to me is something that is wired into our human psyche in a very deep way. So it's likely to sit very deeply in the back of my mind, which OG say are the main source in my decision-making process, and therefore this is what is likely to be most important here. Why is this more important than the reoffenses that we get from opening government? 3 reasons. One, the majority of people who will do crimes still haven't committed crimes. And here I want to point out again something that has happened in opening house, right? OG answered to them, well, you can just keep these people in prison if they're very likely to commit crimes. OO answer, well, you can't always know for sure. And we agree, but it's a comparative, right? Obviously, a lot of people who are very dangerous are going to be kept in jail. But the problem is with people who have not yet committed the first crime, you have no way to know. And therefore, just mathematically, there's a larger number of them that exist in society as a whole. Secondly, note that someone committing their first crime is simply logically a prerequisite of them reoffending. So if we prevent these people from committing a crime in the first place because we deter them from doing it in the first place, that already proves at the very least the same amount of impact as opening opposition, right? Because the exact people aren't going to be reoffenders because they're just not going to be offenders. Thirdly, on caution, right? If I was a victim of a crime, in many cases, I might know how to be more cautious, like if I know a crime has been committed in my neighborhood, in many cases, and therefore I'm likely to be better suited to deal with that. If that person has not yet committed any crime, I have no effective way of defending myself. So the severity of the impact is simply much larger. Let's talk about how prisoners are being informed. Okay, how prisoners are better. OG tell you the following case about rehab, right? I know I'm going to be a new person and people won't hate me and therefore I'm going to be rehabilitated better. But before I move on, OG.
Look, any kind of punishment, whether it is prison or social judgment, if I believe I will be caught, is enough to prevent me from committing a crime. That is no delta.
We don't think that's true, and we've analyzed at length why this isn't true. I don't think I need to repeat this. 2 responses to OG's rehab case. One, it's completely unclear why what we have today isn't enough. And this is crucial because we might get more incentive to go out to jail, but they themselves analyze how terrible prison is on either side of the house, right? The fact that there's surveillance, that I might be abused, that I'm fired for my loved ones. All of these things exist on either side of the house and have nothing to do with this motion. So it's likely to be enough for me to have a very large incentive to want to get rehabilitation. But secondly, people have optimism bias. So even if there is a stigma at the end of the line, I'm likely to think, oh, people are likely to accept me to an extent. And I'm likely to, if I'm in jail, try to see the light as much as I can, right? So it might be a small data. It's unclear to me why the specific addition of this is so crucial. But secondly, it completely depends on prison looking away that is conducive to rehabilitation. Joe's second addition is exactly explaining to you why this isn't the case, why the likelihood of abuse is so much larger, right? Because there's a huge potential in abuse in prisons right now because wardens hate prisoners and prisoners are violent. But in status quo, you can deter against it. After the motion, there is no effective way to catch those things happening because saying that I was abused is effectively admitting to everyone that I was a prisoner, right? So you get significantly more abuse. If prisoners are more abusive, obviously rehabilitation cannot happen because I don't trust anyone who is around me because people are literally beating me up or harming me in other ways, and that's more important. For all of these reasons, I'm proud to oppose. Thank you.